Hi everybody, Allie at My Safe Place here. Sorry about the really poor quality. We've got very bad light today. It's super gray out. And I wanted to do a bit of a disclaimer today because of the sensitive nature of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about people's faith or religion. That's actually not what I'm really talking about. It's just what happened to me. And it's not really about the faith or the religions that were involved here. It's just a perfect illustration of the kinds of things that covert narcissists and narcopaths and sociopaths will do in order to test whether or not they can infiltrate, so to speak. So I was actually telling this story to a good friend of mine the other day, and it really brought up a lot of emotions from way back when. And it started with me dating my first husband, who was a different faith from me, quite different. I was born and raised a Catholic, soloist in the church choir, picked at age 12 to play the Virgin Mary in the Nativity play. You get the idea. But I also grew up in Montreal, which was incredibly multicultural, and loved that about Montreal. And most of my friends spoke three languages, English, French, and whatever mother tongue. So it could have been Italian like me, or Polish, or Portuguese. And by the time I got to university, the expansion of our friendship group included every possible race and religion, and it was normal for us. So when I started dating my first husband, it wasn't a big deal for him or for me that I was born and raised a Catholic and that he was Jewish. He was very much secular Jewish. He wasn't particularly orthodox in his practice, and that it didn't seem to bother either of us, especially since his parents were divorced, and his mother had remarried outside of the faith as well, another Catholic actually, and a man of a different race, and he was from the Caribbean, and he also had an older brother who was at the time dating a woman of Asian descent who later became his wife. So there was a lot of mixed race, interfaith going on. So there was no conflict off the bat when we first started dating. And as things progressed, and they progressed quickly, as they usually do, with a cluster B personality disorder, he had asked me to marry him after 3 months of dating. And my parents were very enthusiastic, especially my mother, because basically he was in dental school and he was going to be making a lot of money. So they were thrilled about that. And as I found out that later, that seemed to be the only concern they ever really had, was having a daughter married off to a wealthy dentist. So after we became engaged, what started to happen was his father's side of the family, who was more orthodox than his mother's side of the family, started to behave in certain ways towards me in an attempt to get me to convert to Judaism. And I personally had no problem with Judaism, obviously, where I wouldn't have been dating a Jewish guy. And based on, my upbringing as a Catholic, Jesus was Jewish, Mary was Jewish, Joseph was Jewish. They were all Jewish. So all the apostles were Jewish. It was not a big deal. And we had discussed very briefly that we were both kind of secular. We weren't really into practicing, being active in church or synagogue. So it really wasn't looking like it was going to be a problem until after the engagement, when, as I said, his father's side of the family started to approach me to convert. And it wasn't a gentle approach. It was very much circling the wagons with me in the center, and sometimes quite negatively pressuring me, including, grandparents calling me up and offering me a lot of money to convert. And throughout this, I started to get quite upset because I thought we had decided between the two of us what our approach was going to be as an interfaith couple. And that wasn't being respected at all. And when I spoke to my fiance about it, he basically said nothing. Huge red flag. Hello, pay attention. He would not defend me when I was being approached. He would not stand up for me against his father or stand up against the attacks that started to become much more personal and quite nasty. And he seemed to just sort of stand on the sidelines and kind of watch this. And that was a huge red flag that I missed. And what made it worse was when I talked to my parents about what was going on, I kind of got shooed away as though these concerns I was having about that side of his family were minimized. I was told, never mind, some of the family members have actually survived the Holocaust, which is true, they had. So we need to make accommodations for them. And I would tell them some of the things that I was being told, which were really awful and really nasty. And I was basically being ignored or told to be quiet and just shut up, essentially, by my own family. And of course, my fiance was privy to this. Now, and in my own mind, I was thinking that I had a decent enough boundary to be able to say, this is me, this is the way I was raised, this is what I think, this is what I believe, and if it's not good enough for you, you can leave. Major problem. Because what I did by doing that was I put all of the onus, I gave all of my power to him. And I said, if you don't like it, leave. Instead of me saying to myself, this isn't going to work. If this is what I'm going to have to put up with for the entirety of, my life or my marriage, I need to leave. And therein lies the difference between a weak boundary and a strong boundary. A lot of people talk about strengthen your boundaries, but they don't actually tell you how to do it. They don't define it. Well, here was a perfect opportunity for me to define a very powerful boundary. And what I realize now looking back, that he was not just testing me, my fiance was not just testing me to see how far he could push me, he was also testing my family to see how much he could actually get away with. And when you start heading into things like someone's faith or what someone has grown up learning, and allowing that belief system to be disrespected by your own family members or attacked by your own family members should have been a sign to me, had I had better boundaries, that there was something dreadfully wrong. And when I look back at that, that was kind of one of the last big moments that I would have had to get away. Because there had been small tests leading up to that. And that's basically what cluster B personality disordered people do, is they keep testing. They push a little further and they push a little further and they push a little further. And a lot of the time, the boundaries that are being violated or compromised on your part aren't that big. They aren't that important. But when it came to this and him reneging on what it was that I thought we had already agreed upon, what I thought we were going to be going forward with, and he was clearly not holding true, that was the moment, that was the boundary moment where, had I had a stronger sense of self and who I was, and had I had perhaps the support of my parents, I might not ever have gone forward with getting married. And the boundary violations continued. Of course they did, long after that, until he eventually did something that was an absolute deal breaker for me, and I ended it. So, and this has nothing to do with who was which religion. As I said in the beginning, this was more about testing the boundaries at a very core level. And this was just the one that happened, that I allowed to happen, because I wasn't strong enough. And I thought that saying, if you don't like me, leave, was enough, when really the major boundary was about me deciding what I'm going to put up with, not just sitting there and letting him decide whether he's staying or whether he's going. So, and what I learned from that whole experience, when I look back on it, is how some of the small things led up to that boundary violation, and how once I had allowed that particular boundary violation and my parents had allowed that boundary violation, I was toast. I was basically a lost cause. There was going to be nobody standing up for me, because I couldn't even do it for myself. And certainly my family wasn't going to be doing it. And that held true throughout the marriage. 6 months into my marriage, I called my mother up on the phone and I said, I think I've made a mistake. And her answer was, too bad. And I think I've said this in another video. So when we think about making sure that we don't fall prey, become targets again, I think about how important it is to stop and to firm up your boundaries sooner, before it gets to these really big deals, really important things. And I already had passed a certain point when it got to the whole Covert thing. And it started with very, very small issues and built up to that. So I missed a whole whack of things. And that's kind of how they do it, is they get the little ones, and they don't hit you with the big one until they're pretty sure that they've got you. So my words to everybody would be, make sure that you know who you are and what's important to you, what your values are, and that people can give you and tell you exactly what it is that you want to hear. But until you see them in action, we don't know. We have no idea. So keep in mind that a lot of them are very glib, articulate, charming. They've got you figured out. They know how to speak to us. They know what's going to hook us in. And if you don't have a family supporting you, or if you've come from a family like mine where the abusive behavior was actually normal for me, then it's harder to spot, because then things become relative. So in comparison to my home life, this seemed perfectly normal, or it might even have seemed a little bit better. In fact, my future mother-in-law, with whom I got along very well, so I didn't have any of the concerns about having a Jewish mother-in-law, because she was absolutely fantastic. She actually sat me down before we got married, and she said, Allison, I want to ask you and make sure that you're not just getting married to get out of the house, because that's what I did, and I don't want you to make the same mistake, and maybe you should take a little more time. So here's this woman, the mother of my future husband, who seems to be the only one paying attention to what was going on between us. And of course she loved her son, and of course she didn't see what he was doing as particularly wrong. But she herself had been very badly smeared by her ex-husband's side of the family, to the extent that they were actually smearing her to the children, calling her vile names and saying she'd done things that she hadn't done. So now looking back, I understand that she she'd been through it already. And she was happily remarried to someone else. And I think that I lost an opportunity there. Now, I wasn't actually getting married to get out of the house. I was getting married to please my parents, because my parents thought this was a great idea, and he was the greatest thing ever, because of course he was very charming to them. And of course I was going to be well cared for, quote unquote. And I could afford to have whatever I wanted in life, which is ludicrous, because no money can make up for the amount of stress and pain and agony that you go through when you're married to one of these people. So I had a lot of red flags that I missed. There were a lot of opportunities for me to walk away that I didn't take. So, and looking back, I know that my self-esteem was not where it needed to be. It was weaker, and it was that way because of the way I'd been raised. But even people who've been raised in loving homes with really healthy self-esteem can find themselves in situations where their boundaries are being tested, where they're being pushed. And I encourage everybody, if you're feeling like you're doing a lot of compromise on some core issues, it's really time to take it to a completely neutral third party, like a counselor. And it doesn't need to be a marriage counselor, and I would recommend that you not take your partner. If you're having some serious issues around core values and beliefs, and if your boundaries are being tested in a way that makes you uncomfortable, don't involve your family, don't involve your future partner's family. Take it to a third party who might be able to examine the incidents that you talk about with an objective eye, and with an understanding that you can, sorry, my phone's going off, with an understanding that you can maybe listen to the story from the third party's mouth, like without you being involved, without emotions like love or passion or anything like that being involved. So if I have any words of advice to you, if some of those things start to come up, if you're with a new friend or a new potential partner, really, and those boundaries start to get pushed, or that sense of who you are as a person starts to get pushed, my advice is take it to an objective third party. Not one of your friends, not one of his friends. Keep the family out of it. Take it to someone objective. Because I think had I done that, had I taken it to someone objective and really talked about what was going on and not relied on my family and not relied on friends, I think the outcome might have been different. And of course, I can't regret anything. I have two amazing kids. So, but I think it's important. So I hope that story helps. Thanks for watching, and talk to you soon.